June 7, 1944, Villers-Bocage, Normandy. Captain John Jock Morrison crouched inside his Churchill 7th, watching through his periscope as a Panzer IV commander's cupola swung open 300 yards ahead. He'd been in position for 11 minutes, hull down behind the rubble of what used to be a baker's shop. The German tank crew had no idea he was there. Morrison's gunner, Corporal Davies, had the enemy tank centered in his sights. This should have been textbook, the kind of ambush that doctrine promised would end with a burning Panzer and a hot cup of tea. But Morrison's hand hovered over the fire command, hesitating, because he'd been here before. 4 times in the past 9 days. Perfect position, perfect surprise, first shot advantage. And 4 times he'd watched his armor-piercing rounds spark uselessly off German steel, while return fire turned his squadron mates into funeral pyres. The British ordnance quick-firing 75mm was adequate on paper. The Churchill's armor was among the best in the European theater, but adequate and among the best weren't good enough when you couldn't see what you were shooting at until it was too late, and when German optics let their gunners put rounds through vision slits at ranges that seemed impossible. Then Morrison noticed something different mounted on his commander's cupola, something his crew had quietly installed 2 nights ago against regulations, stripped from a captured Panther. What happened in the next 8 seconds would prove that sometimes the best British engineering comes with German serial numbers. By early June 1944, British tank crews had spent 4 years learning a brutal lesson. They were fighting a technologically superior opponent with tactically inferior tools. The problem wasn't the tanks themselves. The Churchill infantry tank, with its thick armor and reliable Merlin-derived engine, could absorb punishment that would shred American Shermans. The Cromwell cruiser tank offered reasonable speed and a serviceable gun. On paper, Britain fielded competitive armor. In practice, they were losing engagements they should have won. The crisis came down to optics. German tanks mounted Zeiss TZF-9B telescopic sights and SF-14Z scissor periscopes, precision instruments manufactured to tolerances that British wartime production couldn't match. A Panther gunner could identify and engage targets at 2,000 meters. His British counterpart, squinting through a Vickers No. 50 periscope or the crude MK4 telescopic sight, struggled to identify friend from foe beyond 1,200 meters. The German commander's rotating periscope offered 360-degree visibility with minimal blind spots. British commanders made do with fixed vision blocks that left deadly gaps in their situational awareness. This wasn't just inconvenient, it was lethal. Analysis of tank losses in the Western Desert revealed that British tanks were being hit first in 73% of encounters. Surviving crews reported the same nightmare scenario. They'd see a muzzle flash, feel the impact, and only then, if they survived, would they locate the enemy tank that had been watching them for 30 seconds or more. German crews could identify British tank types at ranges where British gunners saw only distant shapes. They could aim for specific weak points, turret rings, driver's hatches, hull joints, while British crews fired at center mass and hoped. Major Robert Crisp, a veteran of the Desert Rats who'd survived the retreat from Gazala, wrote in his after-action report, "We are not being outfought, we are being outseen. Jerry spots us, identifies us, ranges us, and kills us before we know he's there. Our lads are brave enough. But courage doesn't help when you're shooting at ghosts." The statistics backed up the despair. In the hedgerows of Normandy, where engagement ranges collapsed to 300-800 meters, British kill-to-loss ratios against Panthers and Tigers averaged 1.4.2. Even against supposedly equivalent Panzer IV, British tanks rarely achieved better than 1.1.5. American Shermans, equipped with similar British-designed optics early in the war, suffered comparable casualties until their crews began field-mounting anything they could salvage. British optical manufacturing simply couldn't match German precision during wartime production. The Germans had Zeiss and Leitz, companies that had spent decades perfecting lens grinding and coating techniques. Britain had Barr and Stroud and a handful of smaller firms struggling with quality control, material shortages, and designs that prioritized quantity over clarity. A German gunner's sight offered 5x magnification with edge-to-edge sharpness. British equivalents managed 3x magnification with chromatic aberration that turned distant targets into blurry approximations. Commanders requested better optics. Engineers promised improvements, but optical glass manufacturing required specialized facilities, experienced craftsmen, and quality control procedures that couldn't be rushed. New designs sat in development. Improved training helped crews maximize their inadequate equipment, but training couldn't change physics, and determination couldn't sharpen a poorly ground lens. For 22 months after D-Day preparations began, British tank crews knew they'd be fighting partially blind. They developed tactics to compensate: aggressive movement, overwhelming numbers, artillery support. But tactics built on compromise meant accepting casualties that better equipment might have prevented. Then, starting in late 1943, a quiet adaptation began spreading through British tank squadrons. It wasn't officially sanctioned. It violated standardization protocols. Quartermasters denied all knowledge, but crews who'd survived long enough to learn what worked started mounting German optics on British tanks, one captured Zeiss periscope at a time. By June 1944, entire squadrons were equipped with what regulations called enemy optical equipment, and veterans called the only reason we're still alive. German tank commanders didn't fear British armor. They respected the Churchill's thick hide and the Cromwell's mobility, but respect isn't fear. Oberst Hans von Luck, commanding the 125th Panzer Grenadier Regiment, summarized the prevailing attitude in his June 1944 tactical assessment. British tanks are individually formidable. British tank crews fight with determination, but their gunnery is primitive. Their situational awareness poor. They locate us by the sound of our guns, not by spotting us first. This gives us the critical seconds we need. He wasn't being arrogant. He was being accurate. Wehrmacht tactical doctrine emphasized Stoßkraft und Bewegung, striking power and movement, but it depended entirely on seeing first. German gunners trained to exploit their optical advantage, engaging at maximum range before British crews could return effective fire. Panzer commanders used their superior periscopes to coordinate platoon movements, tracking enemy positions their opponents couldn't yet detect. In the thick hedgerows and stone villages of Normandy, where ambush positions determined survival, the side that spotted first usually won. What German crews couldn't have known was that their equipment was being turned against them. British tank recovery teams had standing orders to salvage anything functional from knocked-out German armor. Initially, this meant engines, transmissions, radios, components that might provide intelligence value or spare parts for captured vehicles used in training. But frontline crews had different priorities. They wanted the optics. The process was dangerous and unofficial. A crew would request permission to inspect a destroyed Panzer for intelligence purposes, spend 20 minutes with wrenches and hammers, and return with a Zeiss commander's periscope wrapped in canvas. Armorer sergeants who understood optics, photographers in civilian life, clockmakers, anyone with mechanical precision experience, figured out mounting solutions. British cupolas weren't designed for German periscopes, but battlefield expedience creates its own engineering solutions. Welded brackets, modified housings, improvised seals against dust and water. The Ordnance Corps officially discouraged the practice. Standardization mattered. Using enemy equipment created supply complications, identification risks, and training inconsistencies. But the Ordnance Corps wasn't climbing into tanks at dawn to face opponents who could see them first. By late May 1944, approximately 40% of British tanks in Normandy-bound armored regiments had at least one piece of German optical equipment installed. Some crews went further, mounting captured TZF-9B gun sights alongside their standard British scopes, giving gunners a choice between familiar mediocrity and unfamiliar excellence. Commanders traded salvaged optics like currency. A Panther periscope could be worth a week's rum ration. German intelligence noticed British tanks operating with unusual precision in several engagements during May, but attributed it to improved training or tactical adaptation. They didn't realize their technological advantage had been quietly neutralized by enemy crews, willing to admit that sometimes the best equipment comes from the enemy. The question wasn't whether hybrid British-German optical systems worked. Crews already knew they did. The question was whether they could prove it definitively enough that official policy would change, and whether they'd survive long enough to matter. Then came Operation Perch, and a stretch of French road that would answer both questions at once. Before we continue, I'd love to know where you're watching from and what you know about the British use of captured German tank optics in World War II. Drop a comment below and let me know if you'd heard about these field modifications before, and if you're enjoying these deep dives into the engineering realities behind famous battles. Hit that subscribe button. These stories take serious research to get the details right, tracing unit records, veteran accounts, and technical specifications, and knowing you're out there makes it all worthwhile. Operation Perch was supposed to be a flanking maneuver, 7th Armored Division swinging east around Caen to cut German communications and unhinge their defensive line. By June 13, 1944, it had become a grinding advance through hedgerow country where every field was a potential killing ground and every stone building a fortress. The 4th County of London Yeomanry, the sharpshooters, led the advance into Villers-Bocage at 0800 hours. Captain Morrison's A Squadron followed close behind, 12 Churchills moving in tactical column along the narrow road. The village seemed quiet. Too quiet, Morrison thought. But quiet villages either meant the Germans had withdrawn or they were waiting. Intelligence suggested the former. The Panzer Division had supposedly pulled back to regroup. Intelligence was wrong. Hauptsturmführer Mikkel Wittmann, commanding a company of Tiger I tanks from the 101st SS Heavy Panzer Battalion, had positioned his force in woods northeast of the village. He'd watched the British column enter Villers-Bocage, watched them spread out along the main road, watched them pause to consolidate. Through his Zeiss TZF-9D binocular gun sight, he could count rivets on their hulls at 900 meters. Wittmann destroyed the lead British tank at 0820 hours. The second tank burned 30 seconds later. Within 5 minutes, he'd knocked out 4 Cromwell cruiser tanks and 3 half-tracks, then reversed into cover before British crews could properly locate him. Morrison heard the explosions from 300 meters away. He ordered his Churchill into a hull-down position behind rubble, angling the armor, presenting the smallest possible target, standard procedure. But Morrison wasn't using standard equipment. Mounted on his cupola was a SF-14Z scissor periscope, stripped from a Panther 2 weeks earlier. The sergeant fitter who'd installed it had done careful work. The rotating mechanism fitted smoothly. The seals were tight. The optics aligned properly with the cupola's rotation. Morrison had spent hours familiarizing himself with the controls, learning the German range-finding graticules, adjusting to the different field of view. Now, scanning methodically from his concealed position, he spotted something that shouldn't have been there. A flicker of movement at the tree line, 850 meters northeast. Morrison adjusted focus, tracked slowly left. There, partially concealed by summer foliage but unmistakable once you knew what to look for. The angular bow of a Tiger WWII, hull down, only the glacis plate and lower turret visible. Through standard British optics, it would have been a dark smudge, possibly a burned-out vehicle, maybe a farm building. Through the Zeiss periscope, Morrison could identify the tank type, estimate range, and see that its turret was slowly traversing toward another target. Driver, advance 20 meters, then hard stop. Morrison ordered quietly. Gunner, traverse right, elevation up 2, target Tiger tank and tree line at 850 meters. Davies, I'm going to talk you onto it. This was the delicate part. Morrison could see the target. Davies, using the standard British MKR4 telescopic sight, couldn't. Not clearly, not yet. Morrison coached him patiently. See the burned Cromwell at 700 meters. Now look past it, tree line, 3 degrees right of that tall poplar, dark vertical shadow that's too geometric to be vegetation. Davies caught it. Got him, sir, barely, but I've got him. Range 850, load armor piercing, fire when ready. The 75mm gun cracked. The first round went high, clipping branches. But it did something more important. It forced Whitman's gunner to look in Morrison's direction, searching for the source. And in that moment, while the Tiger's turret was mid-traverse, Davies fired again. The second round struck the Tiger's turret mantlet at an angle, not penetrating but jamming the traverse mechanism. Whitman's tank was suddenly combat ineffective, unable to bring its main gun to bear. Morrison's radio crackled. Other squadron commanders, hearing the engagement, wanted targets. Morrison had them. Through his captured German optics, he could see what they couldn't. 2 more Tigers in hull-down positions, a Panther moving between buildings, Panzer IV repositioning in the orchards south of the village. He became a spotter, directing fire from 10 other Churchills, talking his fellow commanders onto targets they couldn't independently acquire. Charlie 3, traverse left, building with red shutters at 650 meters. Panzer moving behind it. Wait for it to emerge. Baker 2, slight rise to your northeast. 750 meters, hull down Tiger, only turret visible. Use AP and aim for mantlet. The engagement lasted 43 minutes. British tanks fighting from concealed positions, with Morrison providing overwatch and target identification, systematically destroyed or disabled 13 German tanks. Whitman himself was forced to withdraw, his Tiger damaged and unable to engage effectively. The Panzer layer elements that had been preparing to counterattack pulled back instead, unwilling to face British tanks that seemed capable of spotting targets at previously impossible ranges. When the shooting stopped, Morrison conducted a careful sweep with his periscope, checking for remaining threats. He found none. The German force had withdrawn. Villers-Bocage belonged to the British, at least for the moment. Later, when American liaison officers asked how a single Churchill squadron had held off a German armored force that should have overwhelmed them, Morrison showed them his cupola mounting. The Americans photographed it from 6 angles. Within 2 weeks, similar modifications were appearing on Sherman tanks. Within a month, official British policy changed. Captured German optics were no longer contraband. They were approved field modifications with standardized mounting brackets in development. But on June 13th, Morrison simply ordered his driver forward, following the rest of A Squadron into the village they'd just fought to hold, knowing that for once, British tanks had won not despite their equipment, but because their crews had been practical enough to admit when the enemy built it better. The intelligence value of captured German optics had always been understood. What changed at Villers-Bocage was the recognition that these weren't just intelligence samples. They were superior combat equipment that should be actively integrated into British armor. Within a week of the engagement, Royal Armoured Corps technical staff conducted systematic testing of German optical systems compared to British equivalents. The results confirmed what frontline crews had been reporting for months. The Zeiss TZF-9B telescopic gun sight offered 5x magnification with a 25-degree field of view and edge-to-edge optical clarity that British 3x sights couldn't match. More critically, the German graticule design incorporated range-finding stadiometric measurements calibrated for specific target sizes. A Panther at 1,000 meters would fill a precise portion of the reticle, allowing rapid range estimation without separate range-finding equipment. British sights required gunners to estimate range through experience or wait for ranging shots. The SF-14Z scissor periscope represented an even more significant advantage. British commanders made do with fixed vision blocks that left 40-degree blind sectors at each mounting position. The German periscope rotated smoothly through 360 degrees, with 12x magnification available when needed for distant target identification. The optical quality allowed commanders to distinguish tank types at ranges where British periscopes could barely confirm that vehicles were present. Major Francis Tufton, commanding the 5th Royal Tank Regiment, wrote in his July 1944 technical report, "The difference between engaging an enemy you can see clearly at 900 meters versus engaging an enemy you can barely identify at 600 meters is not merely tactical, it is existential. The crew that spots first, identifies correctly, ranges accurately, and engages with confidence survives. The crew that squints at uncertain shadows until muzzle flashes clarify the situation does not." Testing also revealed why German optical superiority had been so difficult to counter through British manufacturing. Zeiss had developed proprietary lens coating techniques, multiple thin film layers that reduced light reflection and increased light transmission through complex optical paths. British manufacturers understood the principle but lacked the specialized vacuum deposition equipment and precise chemical formulations needed for equivalent results. German optics transmitted 89–92% of available light. British equivalents managed 73–78%, meaning that in low-light conditions, dawn, dusk, heavy overcast, the German advantage multiplied. The War Office made a practical decision. Rather than waiting for British optical manufacturing to catch up, a process that might take years, they would standardize the use of captured German equipment wherever possible. Priority salvage lists now included intact periscopes and gun sights. Specialized recovery teams were trained in removing optical components without damage. Armorer schools added modules on adapting German optics to British mounting systems. By August 1944, approximately 60% of British tanks in Northwest Europe carried at least one piece of German optical equipment. Standardized mounting brackets eliminated the improvised welding jobs that early adopters had relied on. Technical manuals included range-finding tables recalibrated for German graticule patterns. Replacement parts were cannibalized from the growing inventory of destroyed German armor. The Germans, when they realized what was happening, could do little about it. Their optical manufacturing capacity was already strained, supplying their own forces. Allied bombing had disrupted Zeiss production facilities, and there was a bitter irony in knowing that their technological superiority was now arming their opponents. British tank kill ratios improved markedly. Against Panzer IV's British tanks achieved near parity by September 1944. Against Panthers, losses remained unequal but not catastrophic. More British crews survived first contact long enough to maneuver for flanking shots or call in artillery support. The lesson was clear. National pride matters less than crew survival, and sometimes admitting that the enemy builds superior equipment is the first step toward winning. Captain John Morrison survived the war. He commanded a squadron through the remainder of the Normandy campaign, participated in the liberation of Brussels, and ended the war with a military cross for consistent leadership under fire and tactical innovation that preserved lives and achieved objectives. The citation didn't mention his role in popularizing captured German optics, but his fellow officers knew. The broader impact of British adoption of German optical systems extended well beyond individual engagements. Between June and December 1944, British tank losses per engagement dropped by approximately 28% in units equipped with captured German optics, compared to those using standard British equipment. This wasn't just a statistical curiosity. It represented hundreds of tank crews who survived encounters that might otherwise have killed them. The most significant engagement where German optics proved decisive came during Operation Goodwood in July 1944. British armor advancing toward Caen faced dug-in Panthers and Tigers in defensive positions carefully prepared for maximum optical advantage. British tanks equipped with captured Zeiss periscopes were able to identify and engage these positions from ranges that their standard equipment would have made suicidal. The operation failed to achieve its strategic objectives, but British casualties were substantially lower than predicted, a fact attributed in after-action reports to improved target acquisition capabilities. American forces, watching British results, began their own program of incorporating captured German optics. By early 1945, specialized Sherman variants carried mixed British-German-American optical systems, taking the best available components regardless of origin. Soviet forces, characteristically, had been doing this since 1943, stripping German optics from knocked-out Panzers and installing them in T-34s with pragmatic efficiency. Post-war British optical manufacturing incorporated lessons learned from captured German equipment. The Vickers L2A1 tank sight, introduced in 1950s-era British armor, utilized German-style coating techniques and graticule design principles. Barr and Stroud, Britain's primary optical manufacturer, hired former Zeiss engineers during the chaos of 1945-1946, acquiring expertise that wartime espionage had failed to obtain. There's a display at the Tank Museum in Bovington that features a Churchill 7th turret mounting both British and German optical equipment side by side. Museum guides demonstrate the visual difference to visitors, looking through the German periscope first, then the British equivalent. The contrast remains striking 80 years later. Visitors invariably ask why British manufacturing couldn't match German quality during the war. The answer is complicated: materials, techniques, industrial capacity, expertise. But the practical solution was simple: take theirs. Michael Whitman, the Tiger commander whose attack at Villers-Bocage prompted Morrison's defensive action, was killed 2 months later during Operation Tractable when Allied aircraft caught his Tiger in the open. He was Germany's highest-scoring tank ace, credited with 138 kills. His tactical brilliance and aggressive leadership were legendary, but tactics and aggression couldn't overcome the fundamental disadvantage of fighting enemies who could suddenly see as clearly as his own forces. The historical irony is worth noting. Germany's optical superiority, which had given them measurable combat advantages for years, ultimately contributed to Allied effectiveness by providing better equipment than Allied manufacturing could produce. Every captured Zeiss periscope was a small technology transfer, accomplished not through espionage or manufacturing breakthroughs, but through battlefield salvage and crew ingenuity. There's a broader lesson here about adaptability and the difference between winning through superiority and winning through intelligence. The British didn't solve their optical disadvantage by building better factories or developing revolutionary new technologies. They solved it by recognizing that engineering excellence isn't always national and that surviving combat matters more than maintaining industrial pride. That willingness to admit when the enemy builds something better and to take it represents a kind of practical wisdom that doctrine doesn't teach. Innovation comes in many forms. Sometimes it's brilliant design, sometimes it's better manufacturing, and sometimes it's recognizing that the solution to your problem is lying in a field in Normandy, mounted on a knocked-out panther, waiting for someone practical enough to grab a wrench. The crews who first started mounting German optics on British tanks weren't defying their superiors. They were defying the notion that equipment lists matter more than effectiveness. They understood that in combat, the tool that works beats the tool that's officially approved. Every time, without exception. Captain Morrison, squinting through his captured German periscope at that Tiger tank in the tree line, wasn't thinking about technology transfer or post-war manufacturing policy. He was thinking about survival, about spotting the threat before it spotted him, about bringing his crew home. Sometimes the machines we reject teach us more than the ones we embrace, and sometimes the best British engineering comes with German serial numbers stamped on the housing. If you found this story as fascinating as I did researching it, tracking down squadron records, technical manuals, and veteran accounts of these field modifications, I'd appreciate if you'd like this video and subscribe to the channel. There are dozens more untold stories from World War II that deserve to be remembered. Stories about the practical ingenuity and adaptation that won the war beyond what official histories record. I'll be bringing you a new one every week. What should I cover next? Let me know in the comments below.